Hello everyone, Woashkonde here, and today, in a new iteration of Book Club, I wanted to talk about um, one of the most famous books from 19th century, which I think to these days come quite actual in its meaning and in its contents, and generally it's like one of the books that I think many people needs to get themselves acquainted with, and it is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment is the book that is telling us the story about Rodion Raskolnikov, a student at the time, or he actually was ex-student, who was living quite a poor life, probably even beyond poverty, because he was barely making his ends meet. He couldn't pay for his rent. He barely ate. He was wearing really old clothes that probably weren't as good anymore. And he actually got sort of had to leave the university or got kicked out of it because he wasn't really able to pay for it anymore. Plus, additionally, he was going through some mm, psychological changes, and I think his mental state wasn't in the best shape, as we would notice based on the first pages of the book, which we will then, of course, learn later. And pretty much the whole book surrounds around the story of one person. Technically, not really. There is many characters, and we learn more and more about every one of them. But Raskolnikov being the main hero here, his transformation and his mental state, something that we are exploring together with the author throughout the whole book. What initially happens, and this book in particular is something that many students are being acquainted with still in high school. At least this is how it has been during my time when I was in high school. And this wasn't the book that I read back in the days. I, to my shame, just read a short description of it and just to get acquainted with it. And as I didn't really find it interesting, I think at that time, I or just decided not to spend my time on it reading. And that was already good enough for the literature. So in all ways, I had a very different perception of who Raskolnikov was, and indeed, from the very beginning that I just described about this character, it may seem that he's more of a victim in this whole situation, and I felt a bit bad about him, not really knowing the whole context of the story and what happened, knowing some factual things that he killed the woman who was pretty much kind of having a pawn shop where she would just give money for enormous interest for those who already not having the greatest time and occasionally could really pay the money back. So knowing that Raskolnikov ending up killing this old lady, I just knowing by this and knowing, okay, so it's like a tragic story, of course. I was under impression that he was really forced, and it was like last resort for him to survive, even to do this crazy crime, to take someone else's life, so that he can continue living. It's like, okay, it's either kill or get killed. It's somebody lives, somebody dies. So, okay, this is one of a different story that I had in my mind of how it all happened. And it still seemed like that. At the very beginning, it still seemed like Raskolnikov is this troubled, troubled young mind, young guy who is being really confused and is being really perplexed by his position. We meet him at the very beginning when he already started to considering committing this crime, pretty much on his way to Alona Ivanovna, the woman who was the interest giver, the money giver, the creditor, right? Yeah. She already appeared not to be a likable person. This is, of course, we're going through the lens of the main hero. So we know that many people already were telling him, and Roscolinkov himself also saw it, that this is a lonely old woman who has nothing really to do with her life. She just sits at home the whole day and continue on earning the money that she doesn't really spend on anything, and she's just acting in this way, I suppose. She's also probably being some kind of a megalomaniac, just how many people in this story in particular, that she was feeling this power over so many men who were hopeless and were looking for some kind of a solution, and they saw the solution in this apartment of Alona Ivanovna, where she was giving everyone their money for some time. So we meet Raskolnikov there. He's already considering where she stores her money, where she stores all the valuables as well. And then we're trying to see, okay, so he still being conflicted. He was trying to remember, so this is how we learn more, that it's not only his perception of this woman to not be really nice, and at first it even seemed like it wasn't his idea at the very beginning to kill her, but it was somebody dropping this at the bar, some other student playing the pool with an officer. They were just discussing this woman, that it will be justified to kill her because her life doesn't mean anything, and with all the money that she owns, it will be possible to do so much good. And this whole logic that is coming from the student as well, it's being said by a student, it's quite a radical idea, and I think this is something that I feel like what we see throughout the years, and it's probably a sideway to another book that I started to read, which called Rules for Radicals, and it's pretty much many people going through the same sort of cycles of how we usually trying to solve the problem that are appearing to be more altruistic and humanitarian, and usually the youth seeing the injustice in the world, they're trying to fix, even most of the times it's even the problems that are touching themselves as well. So sometimes the way that to kill one meaningless life in this particular sense that will save lives of thousands or hundreds, that to that particular student appeared to be justified, even though the officer, the soldier who was playing pool together with him, wasn't really sold on that idea by all means. But that appeared to be enough for Raskolnikov to continue building on his general idea of going and do this crime. And then once he saw the opportunity, that would be a perfect one, because this old lady also has a younger stepsister who was actually considered to be a good woman. So unfortunately, during the actual crime that was happening, Raskolnikov, of course, being an inexperienced murderer, it was his first murder, his first crime ever. Okay, maybe not first crime ever, but his actual, the actual murder, it turned out to be a double murder. So he eventually killed the old lady, and then the sister, who supposedly was supposed not to be in the place at that time, she accidentally came back earlier, or Raskolnikov had no clue when she would come back. So he, in this fear, he just killed Lizaveta as well. So after committing this double murder, he grabbed some money and tried to run away, but then there were some troubles with him getting away, and there were two other witnesses, actually four, a bunch of witnesses, as we started to learn more and more, because Raskolnikov, the next day, I think that's when the part 2 starts, first thought that he got away and got a perfect crime. He got away without leaving any traces, and once he started to realize how many things how many clues he kind of left, he also started to get scared. And at first it felt like he had this raging sort of an excitement when he did the crime, but then after he started to realize what happened, especially with taking the life of Elizaveta, he started to feel much more conflicted and even scared that this is something that will be revealed. So besides all this, he appeared to be not really feeling well, or at least this is something that his great friend Razumikhin sort of tend to persuade everyone around that indeed Raskolnikov wasn't really in his mind, which he supposedly actually wasn't. So then we turn together more and more characters throughout the book, and Razumikhin is exactly this one good friend that was quite a weird friend. According to Raskolnikov, they weren't that close. He was a good guy, and he probably was one of the only friends he made throughout the university times. However, they didn't seem to have really close relationship. I don't know, but maybe when person is related being this delusional human being as Rodion was, it's really hard to say that you have a great friend or not. So Razumikhin was trying to do his best to take care of his friend. He bought new clothes for him. They threw away all the old stuff by accident, by complete accident, and even all the money and valuables that he stole from Aldona Ivanovna, he, meaning Raskolnikov, ended up hiding under a stone and actually not using it at all. And that's when it all started to become much more spicy. That's when Raskolnikov first got to be called to the police, and he first have to give the testimonies. And actually, first he thought he would have to do something about it, but then realized that there were some other things, and leaving all this on this edge of him thinking that he almost gonna get caught, changing his perspective into actually more dominant position of like he started to play the games with Porfiry Petrovich, the investigator who was in this case, who was a more experienced investigator, and there has been many things that has been happening around between these two as well that actually made this whole investigation and following it quite exciting. Besides all this, we also learn more about Raskolnikov's family, right? So he has a mother, lovely mother, who's been sending his money and pretty much sponsoring his whole life in Petrograd or St. Petersburg, because he actually wasn't from there. They were from Ryazan, if I remember correctly, and he also had a sister, and his father was deceased. So the sister Dunya, or Avdotia, she was working at a place of one of the wealthier people named Svidrigailov, who had a wife, Marfa Petrovna. And as we learn more, Marfa Petrovna pretty much saved the Svidrigailov, who was a perverted man who was trying to have sex with pretty much every woman that he saw in his life, including Dunya. But only with Dunya he kind of fell in love. And this is the fact that we should just remember for the future. So after Marfa Petrovna learned everything about, that's what we learned from the letter of Raskolnikov's mother to him, after him coming back from delusion, he also learns that his sister got a fiance, and this fiance is Fyodor Petrovich Lucian, a good friend or a relative of this Marfa Petrovna, where Dunya and Svidrigailov, Marfa Petrovna's husband, they kind of were caught and allegedly had an affair or something. So Dunya was about to get married, and in this part, in the next part, Raskolnikov meets Lucian. And at first, even though initially we I personally, okay, at least, didn't get why Raskolnikov was so negatively, was feeling so negatively towards Lucian, just because all we knew that he was a wealthy man that wanted to marry his sister. He already felt something shady about all this idea, just because I don't think they knew each other before. They didn't. And there were many promises made in terms of how this wealthy man will try and kind of solve all the problems of Raskolnikov's family. But Rodion felt that Dunya is doing that only because of him, and pretty much because he's been such a troubled child who couldn't really take care of himself. Even though, like, there were some suggestions by Razumikhin that they could write some articles together or translate articles together or some other things like that. He apparently didn't feel working in such a way, right? As we would learn later about his mind and his state of mind. Lucian actually came to see Raskolnikov, Raskolnikov being in still this delirious state, according to Razumikhin and many other people. I mean, he kind of was. He almost kicked out Lucian from his apartment and pretty much said how disgraceful this man is and what he's trying to do. And Lucian also didn't appear to be a good man in the way he handled the situation. And we will learn actually more how unlikable of a character he is. And it was also funny that, he's being this man in his late 40s or even early 50s. He was also the representation of this old elitist people, actually not coming from Petrograd, because he was described as this old man who is trying to be acquainted with all these fresh new ideas that all these young people in Petrograd are talking about. So he was trying to be your cool parent, right? It's like remember this meme with Steve Buscemi and a skateboard? That's pretty much what Lucian was trying to do. He actually wasn't feeling this way. He was trying to blend in with this more fashionable ideas that he didn't know anything, didn't understand anything, and didn't believe in them, of course, as well. He was just trying to blend in and be safe in the way he's earning money. And as we'll learn later, the only reason for him to marry Dunya was that he felt that it was such a noble act for him to marry a woman who is coming from a poor family and sort of save her and save her family, and she would be forever grateful, and this is the way for him to bolster his ego, pretty much. That's the way he saw the marriage. This man in 19th century, terrible, but yeah, anyhow. So that's Lucian. And then we learn more about Raskolnikov, that he first got more delirious at the time when he actually fell in love with the daughter of the landlord, who died at some point of a time, and they were almost also engaged to the point where Raskolnikov also tried to kill himself. And then what we learn even more interesting facts about Raskolnikov himself is that he actually wrote some kind of an interesting article. And that article was brought to our attention by the investigator, Porfiry Petrovich. So one would say, what is so peculiar about the article that was published in one of the newspapers? Well, this is pretty much the whole fabula of the story, right? The crazy or not so crazy ideology that sort of challenged the status quo and not really challenge, but more try to ascribe certain, trying to explain the world in the way that Raskolnikov, with all his uh, feverish mind, tried to assign. So, according to him, there were two types of people. There were one type of people who are just regular people who are living according to the rules, who are trying to abide the law and like be good people, and they just this meaningless human beings who just living lives and it doesn't matter if they ever existed. And then the second time of people who are doing whatever they want, and for them it doesn't matter what means for their ends are needed. They always feel like whatever it takes, they will do for them to achieve whatever they want to achieve. And one of the main examples that Raskolnikov gave was Napoleon, that he even sometimes started to compare himself. And I think first we were still going through this feverish thoughts about Raskolnikov and him committing this crime and how he would try to escape from the punishment and try not to get away with it. I think that was also a lot of thoughts in his mind of how not to get caught. Then, after Porfiry Petrovich introduced us to this article, now we'll learn even more on why in the first place he actually decided to kill that woman. Because, right, we saw that after stealing the money and valuables from her, he didn't do anything but just hid them. He didn't go on a killing spree or anything. He felt super shitty about what he did. So, to explain and even why he did it, right? Because I think after this whole happened, I was in with the full expectation that, okay, he will pay back his debts. He will try to flee the country. He will do something, right? That's what people who rob other people, they are trying to do something with what they acquired. But it wasn't the thing for Rodion. What then we would learn that in this article exactly, he and this whole discussion between him and Porfiry Petrovich about the article, he sort of got caught with this idea that what if the normal person, the regular meaningless person, would try to become the one who is the ruler of the world. And Raskolnikov went on a rant saying even like that killing would be okay and that there is no other rules, and then of course the person who is meaningless can only understand whether they are worthy of power and all the riches in this world if they actually will try to do to appear in a situation when they are doing something immoral, even doing something for their own good without necessarily questioning it. So that's how I think, I suppose before even the first suspicions appeared from Porfiry Petrovich towards Rodion. But then the story goes on. So I feel like what's also important to mention, and this shows another side of Raskolnikov, this whole subplot with Marmeladov's family. There has been this drunkard Marmiladov, whom Raskolnikov met also in the first part before him committing the crime. He was just, yeah, like the simple honest man who's just been addicted to alcohol, and he did everything he could to get the money for him to drink. And it all came down to really atrocious events of like, so his wife is always beating him up or scolding at him for him drinking. His wife is actually used to be married to noble officer who then died, but then, or at least according to her, and then with 3 children of hers, Marmiladov looked at her and she was so beautiful and he fell in love and he also decided to marry, and he also had a daughter of his own, Sonya Marmelodova, who then, as we would learn next, after Marmiladov himself losing his job as just a clerk, she being, I think, 16-year-old, she pretty much became a prostitute so that they can survive, because Katerina Ivanovna, the wife of Marmeladov, didn't work and she was she had something like tuberculosis. She was in bad conditions. All children were super underage, so Marmeladov didn't work and only drank all the money they had. So Sonia pretty much became a prostitute. Yeah, and 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 it was crazy to see how the addiction also perverted the behavior of Marmeladov and how he took money from his daughter, who was put in this in this awful condition just so she could take care of the family and young kids. He still took money from her and just drank it away. And it's scary to think that there are people like this and who are so ill to the point that they just lost their battle against the addiction. There is just no battle. There is no battle at the point. And when he died in the accident with the horse, Roscolinkov kind of tried to take care of his family. He gave away all the money he had that he received from his mother for funerals. That was, he had this weird moments of him acting in a noble way or acting in like this bad guy way, in the sense of he's this cool dude, not necessarily not a shy student as he appeared to be in the first pages of the book. He appeared to become to have like some stronger character, I would say, or at least that's what it felt. That's what I felt when reading the book. He changed and grew up into some kind of a stronger character, and even though he was sometimes acting hysterical, especially when he was having conversations with Porfiry Petrovich about the investigation, and the moment that he helped Marmeladov's family, he met Sonia, and she was the first person he shared his story that he killed, and he started to explain what he did, and then she probably the only all-around positive character. I mean, Razumikhin, I feel like Raskolnikov's family and Razumikhin also are positive characters, more or less, and Porfiry Petrovich. There are a bunch, but Sonia is almost a saint, really, from, and I suppose it's also kind of a biblical allusion in terms of this as well, of course. Like Maria Magdalena and Sonia Marmeladova. Yeah, but anyhow, maybe I'm saying nonsense. So, remember Svidrigailov? It appeared to be that he heard this whole confession from Raskolnikov to Sonia about him killing. And besides all this, beside the confession, Sonia asked and sort of almost persuaded at that point of time Raskolnikov to actually admit that he committed the crime, and pretty much, um, yeah, he would just go to prison for what he did, and that will be his redemption. Which Raskolnikov first refused to do, but then he actually ended up doing. And I feel like the whole book is filled with this thrilling moments of like Raskolnikov almost being getting caught, and then when he knew that Svidrigailov learned about him killing, and Svidrigailov being in Petrograd to try to again be back together with Dunya, who had no interest of doing anything with him. He tried to use this confession of Raskolnikov to blackmail Dunya into loving him, and it actually almost ended up in this really weird way when he called Dunya to see each other to talk about her brother, and then it almost ended really badly. It's good that Dunya actually had a revolver with her that she sort of used and shoot at Svidrigailov. Almost killed him, and but he actually allowed her to leave. Yeah, those were already appeared to be much more weird moments. And another moment I feel like worth mentioning about Lucian, that we learned how this person like is actually disgusting, was the moment when he tried to screw Sonya Marmelodova, when he tried to say that she stole 100 rubles from him, which she hasn't, and he intentionally put it into her pockets. And well, little did he know that Lebezatnikov, who was living with him together, noticed that and decided to act in a noble way as well. So he made sure that people understand that it was Lucian's deed and not Sonya's trying to steal any money, because she, as I said, she's like the sane person in this whole story. Besides giving more details, I think there are some more peculiar details, like with Svidrigailov when he's stressed. I had the fact that he was seeing dead people was a bit crazy and delusional and worrying about. And it was at some point of time, so many people were having different visions or acting in a weird way, or were being delirious. So at a point of time, I was even laughing reading that again another character is being delirious, and I was like, because he peculiarly was using this one word. So yeah, the whole story pretty much ends up in Raskolnikov confessing. He was considering committing suicide, but he just couldn't. Because to the big question of whether he is this normal person, or whether he is worthy, or as it was coined in the famous phrase in original that sounded like «Тварь ли я дрожащая или право имею», which could be loosely translated as if I'm a worthy person, or I'm like a coward. So he answered the question for himself that he is this coward, that him making this crime, trying to cross this border between normal, non-worthy people into this league of worthy ones, of those megalomaniacs who just dare to do whatever they want to keep the power and use the power. He realized that he is not the latter, and that's what Sonya also kind of helped him to realize. And then after the confession, this whole story kind of ends up in a happy ending, surprisingly. I mean, somebody going to prison, how much is it of a happy ending? But yeah, some characters died, understandably so. Um, Raskolnikov and Sonya, actually, in the epilogue, they went to this prison in Siberia, and Sonya was still super helpful. Everybody liked her. Raskolnikov was super introverted and was probably more like a hermit in prison. Yeah, he was working and not really talking with anyone. That's why people didn't like him. But then it was such a heartwarming moment when he realized that all Sonia did, all this, I think it was like half a year or a year they've been there, he realized how much she means for him and that um, she's his love, he's in love, and he even cried, and they were sitting holding hands, and it was a cute moment, not thinking that they still had to go for 7 years of doing all that, and then that Raskolnikov kind of suggested to Razumihin marry his sister, and they also were together. So that was also a cute moment because they're both nice characters and good people, and we were kind of legitimately happy for them. So, weirdly, so the story ends in a nice way, which is good. Yeah. But it also says a lot that, I feel like there are some people still in this world um, that are living by this ideology, and sometimes, they like considering that there is anything in this world is possible for them, and there is no punishment really coming after. Well, for Raskolnikov, the punishment came in the sense that he went like full 180, 360, whatever you want to call it, in terms of all the perceptions of what he did, why he did, who he is, and whether he understands who he really is. And it also, what I think, helped because, of course, all the people are social beings. I think people around him help him to understand that. So, I hope um, that those people who are also living in this weird delusion of, being the megalomaniacs or whatever other crimes and horrible things they have in their heads, um, they would be able to understand before committing any crime or horrific situations, that that's not who human beings are, and that's not what supposed to be. All right, that was it. They were my thoughts about crime and punishment. I would appreciate you leaving your thoughts down in the comments. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. Bye.